Congratulations on getting to the national finals. My name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based think tank that does research on K-12 education, and encourage my other colleagues to introduce themselves.
My name is Tim Isaacs. I'm executive director for the Center for Teaching the Rule of Law at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia.
My name is Darcy Kern. I'm a history professor at Southern Connecticut State University, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, we are the Unit 1 from Maggie L. Walker Governor School in Richmond, Virginia. My name is Connor Diaz, and I'd like to thank you all for taking time to judge us today.
My name is Varun Mundke.
My name is Nate Bampton, and this is our sponsor, Ms. Romschneider.
Great, thank you so much. So this is Unit 1. We'll be addressing question 1, and I'll read all of the Unit 1 question and all of question 1. So Unit 1, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? Question 1, quote, the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution, end quote. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Timer, you may begin.
There was no clear singular motivation for the American Revolution. Historians and even colonists themselves disagree about the driving factors and the significance of different ideas. However, some crucial revolutionary principles and understandings were Republican equality and the fear of conspiracy to destroy liberty.
According to Gordon Wood, the Whig conception of equality was a quintessential principle of the American Revolution. Gordon Wood wrote, quote, it was widely believed that equality of opportunity would necessarily result in rough equality of station, end quote, and it would follow everyone would be content knowing that they are responsible for the outcome of their life. In pursuit of this, every state constitution prohibited titles of nobility, denying anyone a permanent artificial boost.
Another prominent idea in the Revolution was a strong fear of conspiracy against liberty. John Dickinson questioned, ought not the people therefore to watch, to observe facts, to search into causes? With an Enlightenment emphasis on causes, the Americans saw the end of benign neglect in the following acts as the British scheming to take American freedom. In the same vein, the Pennsylvania 1776 Constitution attempts to make sure the government can never execute conspiratorial designs. Section 15 requires that laws be attached with purposes in their preamble, and that before they can be passed, they must be put before the people to vote on. It observes the government with a microscope and denies any trust to the intentions and actions of the government, fearful of a possible government conspiring to harm its own people.
The Lockean conception of consent doesn't pose any significant problems to the creation or amendment of constitutions. Though Locke asserts that consent is, quote, the beginning of political societies, his conception of what exactly constitutes consent is somewhat nebulous. For Locke, consent is either provided through positive engagement or express promise and compact. This malleable definition makes it easy for constitutional framers to work around any problems of consent.
In one of his letters to Madison, Jefferson breaks from the Lockean view, reasoning that, quote, the earth belongs in usufruct to the living. By this, Jefferson means that the consent afforded to a constitution by some long-dead founding generation can't be conflated with the consent of a living one, and thus that consent can be constitutionally generational reaffirmation. Jefferson shows that Locke's conception of implicit consent can be overexpanded to create consent where really there is none.
The problem of implicit consent is particularly clear in the territories, like Puerto Rico, where according to the Insular Areas Report, fundamental rights apply as a matter of law, but other constitutional rights are not available. Puerto Rican citizens cannot consent to constitutional change or even legitimate governance because they are denied representation.
Consent also proves problematic when constitutional change is pursued too quickly or without popular election playing a role. For example, the rapid passing of the 18th Amendment prevented the American people from adequately consenting to the amendment before it was ratified.
Revolutionary principles have evolved over time. The expansion of suffrage through the 13th, 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments cemented voting's role in articulating popular consent, yet voter turnout remains incredibly low, with only 53.6% of people eligible to vote turning out for the 2016 general election. This is troubling if we want revolutionary principles like popular consent and civic virtue to remain important values.
Politicians like Bernie Sanders have transformed and reinvigorated the revolutionary principle of equality. His skepticism about wealth inequality contrasts the founding generation's ideal meritocracy as described by Gordon Wood. Sanders criticizes this Whig revolutionary conception of equality in favor of a more robust system of wealth redistribution through taxation, regulation, and government programs.
Many American politicians share the founders' fear of conspiracy to undermine liberty. Ronald Reagan, in particular, saw this conspiracy in the federal bureaucracy and sought to devolve bureaucratic power to local and state governments. The revolutionary principles from which he drew his ideas can be seen in his 1964 Time for Choosing speech, when he said, quote, "Either we accept the responsibility for our own destiny, or we abandon the American Revolution and confess that an intellectual belief in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves." Reagan slashed budgets and used Article 2 appointment powers to allow people like EPA Administrator Ann Gorsuch to limit federal power. Although Reagan's ideology greatly contrasts that of Sanders, both politicians draw from revolutionary principles which still animate our politics today. Thank you. I'll be ready for your questions.
Great, thanks so much for that. And my colleagues then have some follow-up questions. I'll begin. The quote from the question was from Benjamin Rush. He was both friends with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who themselves were revolutionary allies, as well as later on presidential rivals. How did Jefferson and Adams's view of revolution differ?
Jefferson saw a revolution in the heart, Adams saw the revolution in the hearts and minds of the people, whereas Jefferson saw it as something that would continue on and be reaffirmed by each generation. Therefore, it must be defined by the people's active consent to that government. In other words, it's not just an ideal in somebody's head, but it must be something that people positively engage with on a substantive basis in order to be truly legitimate to the people that it affects.
Another basis on which the two agreed or disagreed was the extent to which they thought that Christian morality should play a role in cultivating civically virtuous citizens. We see that John Adams thought that Christian morality, specifically Protestant Christian morality, was essential to creating civically virtuous citizens. Whereas if we turn to Jefferson's writings on the cultivation of the natural Aristoi, we see that he thought that secular education was the best way by which we could cultivate citizens that would be able to actively engage in politics in an informed way that benefited everyone within society.
Just quickly as a follow-up to that, so what were their each one of Adams and Jefferson's views on the French Revolution?
Jefferson was very clearly in support of the French Revolution. It became actually a major contention over his presidency. I remember there's a political cartoon which depicts him just like sacrificing essentially American ideals. It was a major point of contention.
On the other hand, we would see somebody like Madison, who's definitely more conservative. Jefferson liked to take these ideals and run away with them. And this can be seen in some of these more radical ideas like the generational reaffirmation. However, Madison is definitely more tempered, and we can see this in the way that he influenced the Massachusetts 1780 Constitution to create a stronger executive. And that would have been against what other people would have determined to be a proper democracy. But he believed that that the French Revolution would be too radical, and he thus didn't want to support it as much as Jefferson did.
Moreover, I'd like to emphasize the fact that though Jefferson was certainly sympathetic to the French cause, he did not have a blind loyalty to the French cause. His writings on generational sovereignty were largely in part a reaction to the failures of the French Revolution. He saw what happened when there was no organized method by which a constitution could be rewritten on a successive basis, and thus tried to outline that in his writings on generational sovereignty, or in a convention would be called every 19.1 years to rewrite the Constitution in its entirety.
To finish off your question about Adams, during Adams' administration, there's the XYZ affair, where essentially XYZ Frenchmen tried to bribe American diplomats, and it causes a quasi-war almost between France and Britain. So I think that can indicate that Adams didn't really like the French Revolution or the French system.
Okay, question. Can a large, diverse, divisive, pluralistic society such as we live in today ever find consent on anything that government does?
I don't think so at all. If we look at the Ken-Arrow probability theorem, which states that if people are given multiple choices on policies, there is never going to be a majority consensus on it. It makes it impossible for consent to ever truly be achieved. And when you combine that into two delegates or two candidates that people have to vote for, it doesn't even reflect full consent when people are voting for a candidate.
Moreover, the American conception of consent is a little different from the Lockean conception of consent. Whereas Locke argued for the input of individual consent, we as Americans seem to emphasize a sense of communal consent. This is evident in both state and federal constitutions. Article 4, Section 3, in regard to the combination of states with the creation of new states, states that we need to have the consent of both the state legislatures and the federal Congress to do so, but doesn't emphasize a popular vote that might be held within those areas. This is reiterated in the First Amendment of the Massachusetts State Constitution, which prohibits the combination of townships in many of the same ways that the federal Constitution does.
To further address your question more directly, I think what my colleague is talking about with consent really does apply, because when we consider the way that immigrants coming to this country, who are some of the more diverse people in our society, and they're what contributes to the diversity of thought that we experience in this country, they positively consent to be governed by the American system when they come here. And that is further seen in the way that Article 1, Section 8 allows for Congress to pass laws of naturalization, and therefore passes these naturalization tests that help people become acquainted with the country that they are now joining. Also, we can see through the 10th Amendment that states and localities are able to educate their populations with civic virtue, and that helps bring these diverse groups together in order to positively consent together in sort of some political religion.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could speak more to the issue of wealth that you mentioned, the issue of wealth and consent, particularly wealth, both government use of wealth and also wealth as it just generally affects the political system. What is the relationship between money and consent in our modern US politics?
My personal view is against that of Sanders, but people like Sanders believe that material wealth affects our ability to positively engage with our society. They say that if I do not have a certain amount of funds, then I cannot adequately participate because I don't have the ability to subsist, regardless, forget, participating in the political system. And this is corroborated by people like Gordon Wood, who said that the virtue in the convention of the Constitution was disinterestedness. We don't see that in somebody who has to work a wage earning job. And so that affects their ability to positively engage with the political system.
Furthermore, I would like to kind of contradict Senator Sanders' view almost. If we look to campaign finance laws, we see that people are severely limited in the amount they can donate. They can only donate up to $5,000, actually $4,800, and that's only with conjunction of the primaries and the general election. And so with that amount of limitation per person, per candidate, it's substantially less influence. Money has substantially less influence than people suspect.
I disagree with both my colleagues and lend more sympathy to Senator Sanders. I think that station does play a huge role in the amount you can input into our political system. Take, for example, the fact that election day is only on a weekday. People who do not have the liberty of taking off work to go vote might have trouble consenting to the electoral systems that govern them. Moreover, the 2010 Citizens United versus FEC case, which applied the First Amendment right to political speech to companies, gives people with more money essentially a louder voice in politics.
If I may ask one more quick question. What exactly is civic virtue?
Civic virtue is people's willingness to participate in the political system, and that's one of the main virtues that people in classical Republican societies really want to encourage the most. People should be actively willing to participate in their government and be invested in whatever outcomes come from that legislation.
Gordon Wood quite succinctly defined civic virtue to mean one's willingness to submerge their own interests in the interests of the common good.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you and your teacher and your parents for all of your hard work. This is very difficult material. You clearly know it quite well. I was very impressed with your introductory remarks, the way in which you used a lot of historical quotes from John Dickinson and contemporary figures, Bernie Sanders, Ronald Reagan. Gordon Wood was one that you used, well-noted scholar. And I thought you did a good job in your introductory remarks. You're very, very strong on the philosophical principles around consent. And I thought that you addressed that very, very well. You brought that knowledge forward. I thought the way in which you unpacked the couple of questions that I bundled together there on the American Revolution and the Jefferson and Adams's view and differing views on revolutions, I thought was really quite sophisticated, You used a variety of different historical examples to highlight some of that, some of those differences, including the XYZ affair. And I like the way you explained Adams's and Jefferson's differing views about civic virtue. One was sort of more theologically based, one was more secular. I could go on, but you really, you have very, very complete and thorough knowledge of the topic. So congratulations. You should be very happy with your performance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
One of the things that I always look for is disagreement among groups. And Connor, I was glad to see you boldly step forth and say, well, I disagree with both of my colleagues, and then defend your position, defend it well. I was particularly pleased with some of the just historical evidence that you used. I mean, it was from all over the place. And it wasn't just, okay, let's just throw this out there and see what they think of it. I mean, you knew what you were talking about. It was relevant. The quotations you used were all very, very pointed. You didn't limit yourself to the past. You chose the present. And so from beginning to end, there was a broad and deep understanding of the question. And that was very refreshing. So well done, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I would like to echo what my colleagues said. You guys have a very thorough knowledge of this. You have clearly thought about it deeply. I thought you gave very good examples. The example of Puerto Rico was interesting. I liked how you said that Jefferson supported the French Revolution, but he was not blindly loyal to it. He wasn't Thomas Paine. I thought your answer to my question was very strong. You talked about campaign finance laws, but even pointing out that election day is on a weekday and some people can't take that time off to vote was sort of a practical aspect of it that was very good. It was a real pleasure to listen to you guys. You guys are very, very thoughtful, very strong, and just a pleasure.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for spending the time to do this with us.
And thank you for working with these young men.
I've had them for 2 years now. They're good ones.
Good luck.
Thank you.